Friends, we're with Eric Groody today. And Eric, thank you so much for joining us here on the Train Talk Media podcast. Let's talk Housatonic Railroad. First of all, what drew you to the railroad? And can I tell you, doing a little background research before we hooked up and talked about it, what an interesting railroad.
It really is. One of the things I enjoy about the Housatonic is it's a perfect type subject to model. It's a small short line here in Connecticut, about 120 miles long, limited number of locomotives and rolling stock, limited numbers of customers, and that's really one of the things that appeals to me about modeling this railroad.
Yeah, but the neat thing about it, though, it's big gun industries. It's not like a couple of tank farms and and a feed store and whatnot. It probably started out that way, right? It's there are major industries along this route.
Well, the Housatonic actually, the original Housatonic was chartered in the late 1830s and 1840s and ran really from the Bridgeport, Connecticut area along the shore with Long Island Sound up into Massachusetts. That later on got taken over by the New Haven, and probably the late 60s and early 70s, traffic really started to diminish, and then a good portion of it was rail banked in the 1980s. So in the late, I think, 84, 85, the new Housatonic became a vision of John Hanlon, the owner then, and so he started off rebuilding, named it again the Housatonic to honor the original line that ran there. Well, it's based in Canaan, Connecticut, and runs primarily north to south. It interchanges with CSX in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, travel north to south down as far as Danbury, Connecticut. This is mostly in western Massachusetts and western Connecticut.
Right, I saw that on the map.
Right, and there is some east to west component too, although most of that's been some part of it's been abandoned to the New York border going west from Danbury. The Maybrook line is what I'm talking about there. There is also an eastern leg of the Maybrook line, which runs all the way over to the what's currently like the Waterbury line that runs from New Haven to Bridgeport area north to Waterbury. Part of that track is out of service. There aren't really any customers down there, but the Champaugh Lumber Reload Center is located on the Maybrook line, so that's actually a portion that's still in use for an east-west component.
As we look at this marvelous layout behind us, Eric, how closely do you try to follow the real line's operations? And the scenery is magnificent. I remember I bothered you once. I said, you look like my boy Tyler, the Tonino and Western. It has that same kind of feel for that Washington-based layout, if you know the one I'm talking about.
I do. Yeah, I do try to model primarily the customers of the Housatonic. The Housatonic being 120 miles long in western Connecticut and Mass is really very scenic. There's a lot of running along rivers and woods and forested areas and hills, very typical New England scenery. And I opted to actually not model a lot of that and focus more on the customers themselves. I try to use the scenery as a scenic separator between industries. So some of the towns you'll be 5 boxcars away. There's an industry that's actually about 25 miles away in the real world. But I try to use it as a scenic separator, and I really try to focus on capturing the essence of the industries, make them recognizable to people that are familiar with the area. I've had some of the crew members from the Housatonic comment that I've really kind of gotten their attention, and it brought back memories of switching certain places. The other thing I try to focus on is trying to replicate the actual car capacities. I really like operation rather than just running in circles. So each of the industries I have, for the most part, will have the actual car capacities that the prototype has. I'll start geographically, then operationally. Geographically, I try to have everything on my layout in the same order it would appear in the real world, obviously with spaces condensed in between. So, the businesses that are up in the Massachusetts area are in a separate area, then everything is pretty much sequential down through Connecticut. I didn't make one exception in one area. I do have kind of a fantasy scene, which I could talk about later, that I added. That's not actually on the railroad, but I thought it was kind of cool, so I wanted it on there. By having everything in the order that it appears in the prototype, what I try to do is to actually run the 4 trains that the Housatonic does when I'm doing some operating. NX10, NX11, NX12, and NX13. Those kind of harken back to the New Haven train numbers when New Haven was running the line. What that does is it basically gives me 4 different road jobs that I have, and I usually run the layout myself, so I'll run a specific road job, which will take me about an hour and a half to up to 3 hours to switch, depending on how many industries I'm dealing with.
Why did you choose N-scale for the project?
Well, I started model railroading, I think as most people do. I got my first HO set when I was probably around 8 or 9 years old, and just had it running in a small circle, built a couple layouts at the time. And I actually, when I was 14, 15, I built a good-sized HO scale layout. It was 8 by 12, but I was able to run up to 4 trains at a time, and I was pretty happy with that. Then I found girls and cars, so model railroading went by the wayside for years and years. Finally, later on, once I was actually starting in graduate school and law school, I had a small apartment, and I really wanted to get back into model railroading, just kind of as a stress relief. So I built a small 2 foot by 4 foot N scale layout. Right? That was my first foray into N scale, and I just loved it. I like the fact that you can get a lot of detail and operation in a very small space. So that's really the appeal for N scale for me is to be able to have a lot of operation in a small space, but also I like the scenery to train size ratio. I like having buildings, industrial buildings that will dwarf a train. I'm not a big fan of delivering a boxcar or a tank car to an industry that's not much bigger than the rail car itself. There are situations where that's appropriate, but for the most part, that doesn't really appeal to me. So I like the scenery to track and train ratio. I think is really the best answer.
Yeah, the 5-minute modeler just did a piece on that. You can't have an industry that's smaller than the 50-foot boxcar that's on the siding next to it. So what advantages does N-scale give you in telling the Housatonic story?
Well, I'm fortunate to have a large enough space. It's not a huge layout. My layout space is it's in a 13 by 21 foot bonus bedroom that's over our garage. So it's on the second floor of the house, air conditioned, heated. So it's a fairly comfortable workspace there. In doing N-scale in that size space, and I just run along the shelves. I don't have any peninsulas or anything jutting into the room. I'm able to really incorporate a lot of operation. In HO scale, in the same space, I could probably get maybe three of the industries if I modeled them on the same scale, whereas here I've got a good number of the ones that actually appear in the Housatonic.
What kind of train operations are we seeing on the layout?
I haven't really had a lot of formal operating sessions with people from invited engineers and guests. I have had about 6 of them so far. What I usually do is I'll assign each of the individuals one of the separate trains. So if they're running, say, NX10, that's based in New Milford, Connecticut, runs Monday through Friday and serves the southern end of the line, New Milford and Danbury area. Another person may run NX12, which is based in Canaan, and that actually interchanges with NX10. So they'll bring down cars and take back cars from NX10 so they can do their job down there, and that'll switch industries up in the Canaan area, things like that. I'm fortunate in that each of the industries has a fairly unique car type, so I don't really have to worry about car cards and waybills and everything else. And first of all, on N-scale, the numbers are hard to read sometimes, and I don't like the job to be focused more on paperwork than the actual operating, the physical operation of the train.
Right.
So I'll use general switch lists. And so as a person, say, running one of the road jobs, the switch list may say, pick up 3 empty ethanol tankers from Farmco and then spot 4 loaded ethanol tankers. And then at Kimberly-Clark, pull 5 empty sheet pulp boxcars out of Bay 2 and pull 7 empty boxcars out of Bay 1 and spot 6 in Bay 1 and 4 in Bay 2, that type of thing. So it keeps it fairly simple and I think more enjoyable for the operator, at least from my perspective.
So there are specific industries or scenes that are directly inspired by the real Housatonic, and lots of them. We've talked about that. You have an incredible amount of awesome concrete warehouses. Talk to me about how this all came together, because I look at this and I go, man, this is totally representative of great scenery, but also, a Northeast Industrial Railroad serving lots of distribution warehouses.
Well, again, my goal was to try to model the Housatonic as close as I could to make it recognizable and to provide me, in my mind, simplicity of operations. I'm not making up hypotheticals for a fantasy industry. So in order to do that, I wanted to try to replicate the customers that I could actually see. And I've spent a lot of time driving around since I can get to most areas on the actual railroad within half an hour to about an hour and a half. And so I'm able to take a lot of photographs from public areas there. I can photograph the railroad infrastructure, but I also use Google Earth quite a bit because I'm very adamant about never trespassing on railroad property or private property. But Google Earth gives me a chance to get an idea of the size and footprints of buildings, and you can actually measure out to get an approximation. And then I find that obviously there aren't many kits that would represent the companies that I do, so I learned how to scratch build early on. It was quite intimidating, but the the very first scratch build I did was the Kimberly Clark facility. So I decided to start small with a building that's 24 by 42 inches long and has 2 interior bays that'll hold 7 boxcars and 5 boxcars respectively, along with a trucking area. Once I got that to the point that I was satisfied with it, it became less intimidating. So I then decided to really do a lot of scratch building and kit bashing heavily to try to make industries that look plausible, that look like they required rail car service, but actually look like the industries that the Housatonic really serves.
The neat thing about the Housatonic is that you've really pinpointed it and directed it at representing the real railroad. So that ties the whole thing together. So are there specific industries or scenes that you really believe are standout that you're super proud of?
There are a few. One of them is specialty minerals. It's a dolomite limestone quarry that's located in Canaan, Connecticut, and it's a fairly specialized limestone as far as quality goes. It's used actually quite a bit in pharmaceuticals and other products, not just your typical cement or sheetrock type preparations. So that gets quite a bit of service. It's usually switched twice a day by the Housatonic, and that scene in N scale on my layout takes up about 7 actual feet of space. I try to include elements that are really recognizable. Obviously, you have to make compromises on that. The scene itself is maybe a third of how deep it should be, but I've taken elements that are recognizable from throughout and kind of just condensed those down to the front. So I'm very happy with that. That's fun to switch. And that's actually on the old Central New England line in Canaan, Connecticut. There's one little section that's still there. So that's kind of an homage to the operation on that, but it also does give some regular operation. And it's a very standout scene. If you're ever up in the Canaan, Connecticut area, you can't miss it.
You know, let's talk scenery right now. Let's talk about how you were able to replicate the scenery of Western Connecticut like that.
The first thing I did after I built the shelves, once I decided on the Housatonic and I knew the area that I was going to model, I painted the backdrop, but it's just very simplistic. It's nothing more than airbrushed clouds and 2 different colors for representing distant and background hills and representations of some trees, just to give a feel for the low rolling hills that you'll find in this area. We don't really have the heavier mountain areas you're going to see in New Hampshire and Vermont. So that also helped me dictate the actual scenery contours. Once the track was in place and operating the way I felt was reliable enough, I started the scenery. And honestly, I started this layout back in 2009, and my first real scenery push as far as hills and forested areas didn't come until 2020 during COVID, when I just wasn't going out as much. I had some time that I said, now it's time to start really working on the scenery portion. So the scenery is primarily carved styrofoam insulation, the pink and blue stuff.
Yep.
I use quite a bit of sculpted mold. As far as trees, I do have some Scenic Express trees. I've got about 5 cases of those that I've prepped that I haven't worked on yet. The trees I do have in the layout are some of those really cheap eBay trees from China that come in with neon green.
They're great. They're great. Just touch up the trunks and give them a couple of colors and shake some foliage on it. And you're great.
That's exactly it. And to date, since I had done these as far as the ground foam and painting them, I've got about 1,800 trees in the layout at this point, as far as deciduous, and probably another 500.
Let's talk trees right now, because everybody that does New England does fall, but no. Like Marty's layout and David Popp, his New Haven Railroad, which kind of was, the benchmark for doing a New England railroad. But no, you're doing easily late spring or summer?
I'm pretty much midsummer.
Okay, midsummer. All right.
Yeah. And honestly, one of the reasons is it's hard to realistic autumn colors, because a tree is not all one color when it turns. It's green, it's yellow, it's orange. There's so many different variations. It's difficult. The people I really have a lot of respect for, like Ed Kapuscinski,
yes,
modeling Dead Season. I mean, he has it absolutely nailed. And there's a lot of work and prep that goes into getting the trees to look that real without the foliage. I kind of took the easy way out by just honestly spray bombing a lot of these neon green trees and covering with some ground foam. But I feel that having a mask the way I do kind of gives the impression of heavily forested areas that you're going to see in the Connecticut area and Western Mass where I do model.
So let's get into the process and progress. Since this is an ongoing project, how often do you make changes or upgrades? I would assume as soon as you go out and say, well, I don't have that modeled after you've been out on one of your rail excursions.
I'm not afraid to tear things out where if I'm looking at something or I see something on Google Earth that I missed, I happen to drive by in a certain area and I realized I didn't really nail it the way I wanted to. I will go back and redo things. But to take a step back from that, when I first started doing the scenery and the buildings and everything, I try to work around the layout in layers, I guess is the best way to say it, or in stages. So I'll get everything, like I try to get the buildings, after the track is in place, everything's reliable. I try to get the buildings situated, if mocked up or built. And then after I do that, then I can focus on getting the basic contours and terrain set up. I don't like bare foam, so I always paint everything with like an earth color, tan, latex or acrylic craft paint, just to get rid of that pink and blue. And then I'll just keep adding from there. So I'll go around the whole layout, get everything down to the basic level that I wanted, and then I do a second layer with some more details in the buildings, maybe some HVAC on the roof for some other additional vehicles.
Yep.
Doing pavement, that type of thing. And then I keep adding details as I go along.
I know you've been using the same thing that I discovered back in, I think it was like 2010, 2011, discovering the kitty foam from Hobby Lobby for roads and streets and parking lots, the sheets of the foam. Isn't it great?
It's great stuff. And I've also found some that I've gotten on various online retailers that is self-adhesive rolls.
Oh, see, that's one better too. And I bet it's probably thinner. The only problem about that, it's just a tad thick for N scale, the one that you can get at Michael's or Hobby Lobby or even at Walmart.
Yeah, I don't mind the thicker sheets. I use those in various areas, but if I'm going to do something where the track is actually in pavement, I try to use the self-adhesive foam that I got. Like
nice.
In the Milford, Connecticut scene, all the roads in that downtown area that are just to the right of the Housatonic River, there's a 3-bridge crossing area if anyone's looking at photos.
I'll put that up right now.
All the roads in that area is one sheet of the 1/32 thick self-adhesive craft foam that I color with hand pastels to shade. I'll do the road lines, adhesive road lines, and I'll shade those. So this way there's no actual joints in any of the streets. And then the sidewalks are the thicker craft foam, like from Michael's or whatever else that I'll glue, and I'll just try to cut in expansion joints and things to make it look a little more realistic. So the craft foam is great for roads and parking lots. And matter of fact, I just got a roll about 3 days ago from an online source because I'm starting an expansion, which I can talk about later, and they'll have a lot of paved areas as well.
There's a German modeler, and it's not Fokker, who we've had on with his great lab, but another German modeler, and I can't even try to pronounce his name, that's doing a whole lot of experimentation with scenery and modeling. And his new video talks about boomer dioramas using, which I've used too, but he just couldn't afford it, the crackle paste to get cracks in it. So he talks about using, styrene, or you use the craft foam and whatnot, putting a small coat of plaster on it, letting it dry, and then bending it. It would be pre-cut to go in like the road section you're working on. And if you bend it slightly, it starts cracking. And then he gets in there with different colors and colors the cracks. And I'm going, you genius.
I've been experimenting with that because as I start my expansion, there's a large paved area for the Chippewa lumber reload facility in Hollyville, Connecticut. The pavement, if what's left of the pavement, is extremely cracked and weathered like that. So I've done some experimentation using plaster of Paris with a little black craft paint mixed into it as a base, and just usually getting a really super thin layer on there, letting it dry, and then just pressing on the foam, which will allow it to crack. Some will flake off, but if it does, it looks realistic enough, correcting the color with hand pastels. And so once I get a little larger area that I think is a little more photogenic, I'll probably post some photos of that process as well. But no, I do like weathering and details. I don't over-weather everything. I try to make the buildings look like the actual ones do. And again, I think that's one of the advantages of modeling a smaller prototype like this, where I think it makes it easier on the modeler, because now you have something you can actually look at and photograph and get ideas from, even if you don't replicate it exactly. I think it really helps add to the realism of your scene. And things like the cracked pavement, like you mentioned, I think go right along with that.
Well, I've seen a lot of heavy weathering on buildings, like for Northwest modelers, because of moss and rain and whatnot. So what is it like? You're not going to get a lot of moss and whatnot.
Well, you do see quite a bit of rust. There's a lot more graffiti than I model. I'm not a huge graffiti fan.
Welcome to Connecticut. We've heard about Danbury.
Yeah, no, there's lots of places. Like I've got these beautiful Oak Ridge trash gondolas I got for my expansion for the Oak Ridge facility. I bought about 12 of those from I think Otter Valley made those. They're beautiful models. And I just can't bring myself to cover those with graffiti like the prototypes are. But there'll be some placed a little bit. What I do try to do is, since I run Atlas Code 55 track, it's all flex track and Code 55 turnouts. I've got about, with the expansion, probably about 84 turnouts on the layout. I try to make sure that the track is weathered. So it just gets the basic rust. The Housatonic is not really the best maintained trackage in the world. So they've got speed restrictions in areas that are 10 or 15 miles an hour. I'm not that prototypical. My track's a little better than some of the prototype locations. Well, there's a lot of rocket and rolling. I'll tell you that in some areas, but the crews handle it fine, and they've really made a huge effort to improve their trackage. I mean, they are investing where they need to try to serve the customers. I'm happy about that. But as far as weathering too on the cars, getting back to that, everything that goes in the layout does have some weathering, and in Connecticut, it's going to be mostly graffiti, just regular grime you're going to see from rain. You're not going to see a lot of desert dust or things like that.
Right.
And there definitely is some rust on things. So everything on the layout before it goes on the layout gets a certain level of weathering, whether it's just a little fading with an airbrush or pan pastels. All the trucks and wheels are usually going to be weathered as well. Just with pan pastel, nothing really heavy at this point. And that's not something I really invested a lot of time in right now. Right now, I'm trying to get the layout up and running the way I want it, get it operating. And then when I have downtime small projects, I'll do some additional weathering projects and detail projects like that.
Well, that brings us to the next question. What are some new projects that you're going to be working on, and what's something new you've added recently?
The newest project is my layout expansion. And I'm just going to give you just a brief history as to where this space originally, what it was intended for. When my wife and I built this house in 1998, I was starting, again, I was back into N-scale a little bit. So I wanted to build an N-scale layout in this 6x10, we'll call it a walk-in closet or small office area. And I did. I built the layout, and there was freelanced. I had everything from steam engines. I didn't have any real focus or anything at the time. And my wife could see I wasn't really happy. I mean, it was all Atlas Code 100. I had the snap switches with the control panel and the whole thing. And I wasn't happy with it. I'm very fortunate to have a very supportive and understanding wife. And she said, well, why don't you use the big room next door, the 13x21? Because just the idea is to build a shelf layout that we'll have storage space underneath, and you could have a crafting desk. I could have my workspace in a small home office for both of us to use if we needed it. So I said, thank you very much. And I had holes knocked in the wall the next day. Within about 2 weeks, I used adjustable metal shelf brackets, the ones that fit into slotted spaces. So this way it's all self-supporting. Built bench work on that, and I had the bench work up and going in no time. Built the layout, and now I'm at the point where I was running, I had a continuous running option, which goes along the backdrop, which I will mention a little bit more when I get into operation. But I used that original 6x10 space for storage all those years. I just had that little continuous running track on a temporary shelf. In November 20th of last year, I decided now's the time for the expansion, which will cover the east-west portion of the Maybrook line out to the Chappaq Reload, and the southern part of the line down to Danbury, which I couldn't fit on my layout previously. So on November 20th, I tore out all the bench work that wasn't there from the original layout and had just been used for storage, and built new bench work the next day. And within about 2 weeks, I had the foam on there, built a lift out, and had the track down and running at that point. So my new expansion again is a good size. It'll have 3 primary industries. It'll have the Chappaq Lumber Reload, which is actually managed and used by the Housatonic Railroad. It'll have Winter Brothers. It's Oak Ridge and Interstate Waste Removal System. It's a transload for construction and demo debris and trash that goes out to Ohio, served by the Housatonic. And an interesting customer on there is the Tilcon Stone Plant. Tilcon runs a number of quarries in Connecticut. They have a large quarry in Middlefield, Connecticut, which is served by the Providence and Worcester, whatever their iteration is nowadays. And they would run an actual captive stone train from the quarry to Danbury, Connecticut. And they would run over the Housatonic line. For a while, they were running over the Maybrook line, the Housatonic to get there. Now they're running up from New Haven and Bridgeport through Danbury and coming up. I'm able to actually now run the the P&W equipment on this captive stone train, which gives you a little variety aside from just the Housatonic stuff.
All right, I'm going to throw a picture up of something that I really like right now on the screen behind us. This is from October of 2024. It says, N-scale Housatonic. There's still a lot to add to the layout, and there's the John Deere dealership that I kind of mimicked to build one on my Las Piedras Railroad. And I think it looks like you used a micro-engineering building, and it looks great. Now, I have to ask you the $10,000 question. Are those the John Deere close to N-scale keychain tractors?
That's exactly what they are.
Thank you. I found those. My wife got me a bunch for Christmas a few years ago, and nobody knows they're not really N scale, but it's hard to tell because I drive by a John Deere dealership here, and I'm going, those suckers are big.
No, they're definitely they're not exactly M scale, but standing alone and not being next to any actual rail equipment or next to many vehicles, they work for me. I'm close enough. I like to. It's not something that people are really going to focus on very much. I definitely like to include details, where I can, preferably scale, but not always. And actually, that small microengineering building, that's the very first N scale kit I ever put together for my layout when I started back around 1990 when I was in law school.
And it looks great. It looks great. Yeah, and as a matter of fact, when you see a John Deere dealership now, they all have those fancy signs. It looks like they're corporate signs. And I tried modeling one once, and they're too hard.
My sign is a photo of the actual sign at the location. It's United Ag Products.
Oh.
It's in Canaan. It's a John Deere dealership that's right in that same location across from the Canaan Union Station on the south leg of the Y that's out there.
All right, viewer experience. I first learned about your layout becoming friends with you, of course, on RailWire. We talk about the RailWire forum all the time. What do you hope people notice when they watch your videos on YouTube and also check out your material on RailWire?
I honestly, it's just really to share techniques of what works and what doesn't. If you look at some of the photos, you'll see things that, especially on RailWire, I think had a lot more of a history. I haven't been that active recently, but I definitely need to get back into it. It'll show the evolution of different scenes and how things will change. And even watching the videos, I'm not a videographer, I'm not a great photographer, but what's on YouTube, I really want people to try to just see trains in operation. I want them to see you can make N scale reliable and smooth operating if you just invest a little time and effort in doing that.
So wrapping up in closing, Eric, what's next for the layout?
I definitely want to try to get more operating sessions going with, I don't have a lot of modelers in my immediate area. So I have invited some friends over. I've had them come in from New York and actually some from out of state, farther down, like in the Carolinas or Tennessee or Maine that have come down to do operating. I want to try to do some more operating sessions. I would like to at some point have an article published on the layout. I mean, this is such an honor to be on this. This is the first thing I've really done publicly, aside from some Facebook posts or whatever regarding the layout.
No, it's our honor to have you on, sir.
I appreciate the opportunity. The big thing for the layout is, the end of the line. And I mentioned to you before we started recording that I have recently retired after 34 years with the State of Connecticut Judicial Branch Court Operations Division. And my wife will be retiring in about 2 or 3 years as well. Kids are grown, so we're probably going to downsize and sell the house. Maybe move somewhere south, a little warmer climates, no specific plans yet. The Housatonic will probably cease to exist in about 2 or 3 years, the N-scale Housatonic. It could be transported and reassembled somewhere else, but I know I won't have the space for it, at least not to run it in this configuration. So,
right. Do you see yourself in a couple of years? Are you planning to do another layout, maybe a shelf layout or something a little more manageable?
It would depend on the space. I definitely want to stay in the hobby, and it depends where we end up and what I have for space. But I'm sure I won't have a space the size I do now. Yeah. And again, I'm okay with that. I enjoy the process. I look at this really as a giant means of artistic expression, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I was sitting there looking at a diorama I'm building and I go, this looks like an architectural model, so that's really what the art versus science form of this is so cool.
Yep. And that's really what I enjoy. So even knowing that it's coming down, I mean, I'm making a substantial investment of time and effort. I enjoy the process and that's part of the evolution of a layout. Nothing's really permanent. But what it really has done is given me a chance to meet a lot of great people. That's the best part, is really the friendships. And I'll tell you one thing, that when we get to friendships and people from forums, some of my closest friends I had met on railroad forums over the years. Even though they're not local, we still manage to get together and see each other and stay in communication a lot. We talked about having prototypical scenes on the Housatonic. I've got a fantasy scene called Laterno Gorge. It's a steel trestle scene. There's nothing like that in Connecticut or in the Housatonic. But I was visiting my good friend Louis Letourneau up in just north of Montreal. I was inspired by a steel trestle he had in his layout. And I kept saying, well, I love this, but there's nothing like this. And he gave the advice. It's your layout. Put it on there. So I decided to build a scene. I cut down the microengineering steel trestle. I replaced the vertical legs with more of a detailed lattice structure. It's not as tall as the kit would be for microengineering. I love to have that scene. And no, it's not prototypical, but I still enjoy watching a train run across it. When we get back to what got me to the Housatonic, when I mentioned I was doing a lot of things that were freelance, another good friend of mine, Brian Fonz, he'd been Toxic Avenger on a lot of the forums for years. We were talking, and I was agonized over the fact that I just can't get past the planning paralysis phase of this freelance layout. And the best advice he gave me was look around you. See what's there, get ideas, model something that you've seen, model something that you can research and understand. And I did that, and within 2 weeks, I stumbled upon the Housatonic Railroad. That is really what drove me to the Housatonic, was it was something that, this looks modelable, this looks manageable. And the more I learned about it, the more I really enjoyed it, and that's what gave me focus and got me out of that planning funk. Opportunities like this where I could talk to you, or you could talk to people online, like on RailWire or on other social media platforms. It's important to develop a support network like that. You get a lot of criticism from people and things, and that's fine. I'll take whatever everyone wants to throw at me. Having a network like that where you can share your work, get ideas, get some support, get constructive criticism, I think is vital. Making mistakes for a new modeler is one of the best learning tools you could have. I've made tons of mistakes, and I've ripped out sections that I wasn't happy with the track layout, or I would get a derailment every so often on the track joint, and I'd rip out 2 feet of scenery. I like to have a lot of foreground scenery where the track's not at the edge of the layout. I had this long section that the track was running between 2 small hills, and it looked great until I started getting into developing the industries behind it, and I realized there was an access issue, and I couldn't see as much of the train as I wanted to see because it was hidden behind hills. So I cut out a 4-foot section of completely finished scenery with rock ledges and a nice rock cut, and just completely cut that out and lowered the front, and that made it satisfying for me. So, it was a mistake originally. I enjoyed it while it was there, but then I realized something needed to be changed to make me happy. I learned from that, and this is something I just want to convey to anybody else who might be listening, who's starting or has been doing it for years. Make changes. Keep the layout alive. Don't just, no layout's ever done. No, I want to see people have fun, and I think opportunities like this where we could share ideas and talk about things. I know it's helped me tremendously in the past, and hopefully this will give some inspiration to somebody else.